Well, folks, thanks for tuning in today. I'm sitting here with Editor-in-Chief of the Athletic Montreal, Arpon Basu. How are you doing today, Arpon?
I'm good, Andrew. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And the reason for this interview today was, as you can see Arpon's hat there, he is, of course, with the Athletic, and one of the most recent articles that he just wrote was regarding the news that came out about the NHL draft and how the Montreal Canadiens will be affected by this new notion proposed by the NHL. So, Arpon, if you just want to explain to folks how this new draft proposal, which we expect may happen at the beginning of June, will affect the Canadiens and Marc Bergevin's plans.
Well, basically, this is obviously unprecedented, and no one could have predicted that this would happen. But I think Marc Bergevin, without coming right out and saying so, it's fair to infer that he had some pretty big plans for the pre-draft period, which would have been in June, obviously, but between the end of the Stanley Cup final and the draft, when he tends to be somewhat active on the trade market, he's gathered all sorts of assets and pieces that would allow him to be a little extra aggressive this year. And he's also reached a kind of a timeline with his team, Carey Price and Shea Weber getting a little older, needing to kind of make this team a lot more competitive in a relatively short period of time. So, with the amount of draft picks he's made the last 2 years, the last two drafts, he has 14 picks in this draft. He has cap space. He has perhaps a couple of roster players that he could be convinced to part with in an effort to make a really significant move. Everything was in place for him to do so. But basically, by the draft being held before the end of the regular season and before the end of the playoffs, more than half the team, or half the teams roughly, get taken off the list of teams that you might make a trade with. So it really hampers his ability to kind of take advantage of teams that might be suffering from a cap crunch, or teams that are just looking to fill a hole. He has some holes that he needs filled. And so if the trade market gets dwindled to just the teams that really don't care what happens in the playoffs, which is, roughly 12 or so, it really hurts him in terms of trying to make that significant move that he would have probably tried to make under normal circumstances.
So, Arpon, if you're Marc Bergevin at this point, and you need to decide how you're going to proceed with making this team better going into next season, does this just mean that he's going to have to wait until the completion of this coming season and playoffs before he makes a significant move?
I mean, in terms of acquiring players, he would have to wait. And who knows what that offseason is going to look like. Free agency is going to be weird. The assumption is that if they even if they don't, but whatever they do to resume the season, whether that's play regular season games, whether that's go straight to playoffs, whether that's whatever it is, what seems obvious now and what seems to be a given is that the period between the end of this season and the beginning of next season is going to be squished. It's going to be compressed, and it's going to be pretty short. So in that short span of time, he has, 4 pretty significant players that would be eligible to sign a contract extension. They're his 2021 free agents, 5 actually, if you count. You have Yoel Armia, but then you have his entire top line of Thomas Tatar, Philip Deneau, and Brendan Gallagher, who will be eligible to sign extensions. They'll have 1 year left on their contracts, and Jeff Petrie on defense. So pretty significant pieces. This hitting now kind of makes me feel like those players are probably going to just play out their contracts. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to leave, but it'd be silly for them to sign a contract when the league's finances are such a mess that teams are going to be kind of hampered or squeezed with how little revenue that came in or the losses of this season. So I would think that the sort of the byproduct of this for Marc Bergevin is that he had mentioned back in February how there are 1 or 2 of those guys who are really hard to replace, and he'd like to get them locked up. We're gonna have to see how he's able to do that, because it's gonna be tricky in that period. But it's a lot of things. He can still make moves. I don't want it to seem like just because the draft is in June doesn't mean he can't make a trade in October or whenever the offseason would be, November. He can do that. it's just going to be a lot more complicated and a lot trickier, and he won't have these 14 draft picks to use in those trades. He'll have the prospects. If let's say they use those 14 picks or whatever they do, however many prospects they pick, he can use those in a trade in the offseason. But obviously, a draft pick is a lot more enticing to a team than a prospect that another team chose for you.
Now, given the draft approaching potentially so soon, is there anything he can do between now and the draft that would add anything significant or, anything of that sort?
I mean, I don't know. I guess he could talk trade with teams that have no chance of making the playoffs. Maybe. I mean, who knows? I mean, but I think the one thing that they can do is find a way to maybe flip some of those picks for better picks. See if there's teams interested in getting more volume, because it's such a deep draft. And he's got 3 second-round picks right now. 2 of those are relatively high second-round picks. He has his own pick and Chicago's pick in the second round, so those would be pretty much top 10 in the second round. Then he has St. Louis's pick, which who knows where that'll wind up. But but it'll be later in the second round probably. So that's a pretty enticing package to a team potentially if they want. But the problem there is that teams that are there's no teams that are later in the first round, are playoff teams. So, but that didn't really make a difference. So they could maybe talk to a team that maybe is picking in the 20s and say, listen, we'll give you a pick, at around the 40th pick and the 60th pick if you let us go up into the 20s, or maybe even all 3 of his second round picks. But those are the kinds of things maybe he can look to do to at least improve their standing in this draft.
Now, we don't have confirmation just yet. I mean, all signs are pointing to the format of 2012 in terms of the draft lottery. So can you maybe explain how the draft lottery will affect, I guess, even the top 10 teams, including the Canadiens?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, only 4 teams could wind up with the first overall pick. The Canadiens wouldn't be one of them, but they're, every other team after the fourth worst team would be out of the Alexis Lafreniere sweepstakes. That obviously has more significance in Montreal because he's a Montreal kid. He's from Saint Eustache, which is just outside of Montreal, a suburb of Montreal, and it's big, strong, French-speaking, uber talented player. Would be nice for the Canadiens to have a shot at him. It would be nice for any team to have a shot at him, but most especially the Canadiens, obviously, because of his heritage. So yeah, I guess that kind of stings to a certain extent. The chances weren't very good of them getting that first pick, but they were at least better under the current, under the normal circumstances than they would be under this format. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, the big winner in this is obviously Detroit and Ottawa, who basically Detroit gets locked into the first or second pick. So that would be a great thing for that franchise. And Ottawa would wind up with 2 of the top 4 picks guaranteed. So I mean, that's also pretty good. So but Montreal wise, yeah, not having any chance at all at getting their hands on Alexis Lafreniere. Kind of stings for a team that was supposed to be hosting the draft on top of that. So there's that aspect as well.
In the article you just published, you mentioned that there may be, kind of an excuse, if you will, for Bergevin to maybe not be able to acquire and improve the team as quickly as thought possible. So going forward, does Bergevin have a little bit more rope, you think, going into the next season?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I think this team needs to get in the playoffs. I mean, it's going to be because if they don't, then they need to rethink this whole thing. I mean, if it gets to the point where even with, I don't even want to use it as an excuse. It's a valid reason. There's some validity to saying that we had planned for a big offseason and it got derailed because of what happened. That's not an excuse. That's real. That's a real reason but still. I think all that will they won't be forgotten, but it'll definitely be mitigated in terms of how people are willing to give them a pass on that come next April, May, whenever next season ends. And if they're not in the playoffs yet, then there's going to be a lot of questions, and you got to wonder, will Carey Price want to stick around and not make a run for a Stanley Cup somewhere else? I mean, I think his preference would be to win one here. Will Shea Weber feel the same way? Will all those guys that I mentioned whose contracts are up, will they sort of start looking around and saying, maybe we have a chance, we have an opportunity here to go out and win somewhere else? And Brendan Gallagher, when he was asked about it, he said his only priority for his contract extension is winning. That's all he wants to do is win. More so than money, more so than everything else, more so than fit with the team, more so than love of the city. He wants to be in a winning environment. So I think that applies to most of the guys. And so if they go another season without playoffs, there's a lot of really hard questions the Canadiens are going to have to ask, and Bergevin's leadership is going to be one of them. Like Jeff Molson's going to have to make a decision there. But we're not there yet. I think there are pieces in place to make Montreal competitive next season and into the playoffs. But if they don't make it, then whether this pandemic happened or not, I think Bergevin's going to have a lot to answer for.
What other teams, Arpon, are affected by this draft besides just the Canadiens?
Well, I think any team that was similarly trying to make some significant moves, I think the teams that are least affected are the teams that are stable. The teams that pretty much have their core locked in. But I mean, you even look at the Maple Leafs. I mean, the teams that are affected by what's happening, less so the June draft than just the finances of the league. I mean, there's so many teams who are basically planning on the cap going up a certain amount, let's say $2, $3, $4 million, in order to get their team compliant. And if the cap stays flat, which appears to be the most probable scenario for next season, where they remain with a flat salary cap, teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's tons of teams, or a significant amount of teams, I should say, at least, who are going to have to make some decisions and maybe part with some players. And that's where teams like Montreal, who have some cushion, Columbus, there's a few others that kind of escape me, but teams that have left themselves a financial cushion can pounce on situations like that to get players on the cheap, because there'll be a lot of desperate teams around trying to get under whatever the salary cap winds up being for next season.
And that would likely happen at the end of next season, and obviously going into free agency, whenever that happens to be.
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, let's just say the off season is like a month or 2 weeks. Like, who knows how short it will be? It could be like super duper short. And that's going to be whatever amount of time they give for the off season. I don't even know if I guess they would have to hold training camps again, because teams weren't in the playoffs. And so let's say it's a month. I mean, that's going to be a jam-packed month of hockey news. Like, all this stuff that we've been deprived of over the last few months will all be concentrated in one short period, where free agents are being signed, trades are being made, all sorts of cap gymnastics are going on. I mean, I would imagine that's what's going to happen whenever they determine what length the offseason is going to be.
For sports fans who maybe aren't currently following The Athletic, would you be able just to explain the brand of The Athletic and why it is such an interesting website for those people that haven't followed yet to follow?
Well, yeah, we're a subscription-based website, so you have to pay. You have two options: you can pay monthly or you can pay an annual fee. But generally comes out to, depending on when you sign up and how you sign up, $5 or $6 a month. But what's cool about it is that if you're a fan of multiple sports, we have reporters covering every professional sports team in North America, in the Big Four, I should say. We have a lot of MLS coverage as well, but we have, every NFL team, every NBA team, every Major League Baseball team, and every NHL team has devoted at least one, but often more than one, devoted reporter to that team. So you can pick and choose and customize your feed in our app, which is just a phenomenal product. That the app itself is just a great streamlined way. And you can pick, like, let's say you're a fan of the Winnipeg Jets and the Chicago Bulls. I'm saying that just because I see the Bulls jersey behind you. The Chicago Bulls, the Arizona Cardinals, and the LA Dodgers. And so you could basically choose to follow those four teams, and you'll only get news in your feed from those four teams. So you have all your sports information in one place, with reporters who do nothing but cover that team, and they cover it, like it's life or death. And so you get highly specific local coverage. We also have national writers, who are, who cover their leagues as better than anyone else. Ken Rosenthal in baseball, just name one. Pierre LeBrun in the NHL. We have several other national writers on the NHL side. So you get all that for that one subscription price. And the beauty of the subscriber model, is there's no ads. You don't get any ads. There's no pop-ups. No videos start playing. There's none of the other clutter that you usually see on the other apps and the other websites. Here you just have a clean page or a clean screen on your phone with just the story, a couple of photos. We have podcasts. We have like an extensive podcast network with all our writers. Well, not all, but many of our writers host a podcast. I host one with Marc-Antoine Godin here on the Canadiens. We have something like 20 NHL teams that have podcasts so far. We're hoping to get more. So it's really a well-rounded offer for the price. I think I'm biased, but I think considering what it costs, if you're a devoted and hardcore sports fan, this provides you with daily reading material and daily audio material, for you to get your sports fix.
What is it about The Athletic that initially attracted you, and what do you find so unique about the content that you guys are able to produce?
Well, when I was approached during I guess it was the 2017 Stanley Cup Finals. What year was Nashville in the final? Nashville,
that was 2017.
Pittsburgh. Yep. So 2017 final. James Myrtle had started The Athletic in Toronto. Was kind of taking charge of a Canadian expansion. Reached out to me. I was at NHL.com at the time. I had been there since 2011 on a full-time basis. But so I'd been there for 6 years. Had a really good job, was running their French website. I wrote for the English side. Really had no reason to leave at all. I was covering the Stanley Cup final. It was good living for me. But James proposed this idea, and I'd already been a subscriber to The Athletic in Toronto. I liked the notion of it. I thought it was a good idea for our industry to be going in this direction, to get away from advertising, the reliance on advertising revenue. I thought it was a good idea, and I kind of admired them, and I read what they were doing, and I thought it was it allowed you to break the mold of how sports are covered. Not writing constant quick hits on news as soon as it breaks, and filing little blurbs and really digging deep into sports coverage and going for that extra layer of information and analysis and everything else. So that's what enticed me. I felt at the NHL I was doing a lot of that feverish writing really fast, like on my keyboard and just banging away and getting stuff out. And I kind of, the thought of having more time to do deeper stories and to do longer stories, and really cover the Canadiens to death. I mean, that's really what was offered to me, was that, when I was at the NHL, I wrote about the Canadiens, but it was on occasion, because you can't, they cover all 31 teams, and you're not going to have Canadian story every single day on the site there. And I get that. That's normal. But this offered me the opportunity to really become a beat writer, which I'd never been in my career, and really cover this team, which is what I've always wanted to do. So that all that combined led to the very difficult decision to leave the NHL and join the Athletic, because it was a risk. It was a smaller company at the time. They were only in a handful of cities. I think they had just launched in Cleveland at the time, and Detroit and the Bay Area. So it was really a small pocket of cities when I came on, and I was leaving a really, really secure job at the NHL, but I believed in the model, and I believed in how they wanted to do this. I thought it was a needed change in our industry, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Well, I can say firsthand that if you haven't had the chance to read The Athletic and you are a diehard sports fan, I mean, you're getting quite a bit of content that you wouldn't get elsewhere, more in depth, more in detail about the players and teams that you love. So can't encourage people enough to check out The Athletic. And Arpon, I just want to thank you. You're still working during this COVID-19 crisis, and we thank you for filling us with content during this time as well.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's honestly, I feel like I'm working more. Like, it's weird. I have nowhere to go. I have no games to cover. I have no practices to cover. But I feel like I'm working more just because I think there's stuff to write about, and we're trying to get creative with it, but it's been a challenge. It's been hard at times, but I find it challenging and pretty rewarding when people respond well to something you did.
Well, thank you once again for taking the time to talk with me today. And obviously, we wish you and your family good health, and we'll hope to see more and more content as things pick up here with the NHL.
Yeah, I hope to provide it, Andrew, and you too. Be well over there, and thanks for having me on your show.
My pleasure. Thanks again.